Hi, I'm Tim Donner along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Claude. And this is the Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. On today's episode, bases loaded. Trolling Canada as the 51st state may have done in the Conservative Party. In Oh Canada, WTH. We pull back the curtain on the good, the bad, and the ugly in Trump's first 100 days. The kids in the Democratic Party aren't playing nice with their elders, and we discuss Injustice Democrats out of hibernation. Finally, it's another quick fix to flex the brain in Just for Fun, Volume 70. All this and more in this edition of the Conservative Five.
Anyway.
Justin Trudeau stepped down as Prime Minister of Canada because he was polling in the basement. It was a good outlook for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives forming a majority government. However, President Donald Trump trying to make Canada the 51st state and the Grits choosing a new leader dashed the prospects of a Tory comeback and resurrected the Liberal Party. The way Canada's going, becoming the 51st state of the U.S. might just be the ticket. So, Andrew, what's with the flip-flopping folks up in your part of the world in Canada? Do they have a hotline to the Democratic National Committee on what not to do?
Well, I think it's exactly as you stated in your opening. You know, the Canadians were so fed up with the former prime minister that the inflation was high, the cost of living is out of control, housing affordability, healthcare is in shambles. All these different aspects contributed to Trudeau's downfall. Pierre Poilievre, he had as much as a 25-point lead before Christmas. And then all these culminating factors happened. You had not only Justin Trudeau step down, you also have Trump declaring a 51st state for Canada. That was a downfall to Conservatives, mainly because Pierre Poilievre, he was quiet pretty much the entire time. It took him weeks to respond to what Trump was saying. However, the Liberals, they made that as a central focus of their campaign. Trudeau, he was on camera crying about the tariffs, and then all the Liberal Party members are saying we're gonna be strong, we're gonna be fierce, we're gonna retaliate, and that coalesced a lot of Canadians. And if you look at some of the polling data, that was a top issue for a lot of voters. That if they don't like Donald Trump, they're scared of Donald Trump. But for some reason, Canadians tend to think that Mark Carney is somehow going to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. There was a recent report, I'll mention this quickly. I talked about on LN Radio with Mark Angelides, and it said that Carney had a phone call with Donald Trump, and he threatened Donald Trump by saying Canada will dump its U.S. holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. Now, just a Liberal estimate, it will be about $100 billion. $100 billion out of a $17 trillion Treasury liquidity market. That's nothing. If I'm Donald Trump, I'm laughing at that, and I'm saying, you know what? Let's just raise your tariffs out of 50%. So at Carney, it's gonna be done. It's Trudeau 2.0, but the guy's smarter than Trudeau. So I guess that's the improvement that a lot of Canadians will have over the next few years.
So, Dave, it looks like the Grits have just enough for a minority government, forcing Carney to extend his hand across the table and form a coalition government with the Bloc, New Democrats, Green, the Bloc being the Bloc Québécois. What to make of the fact that the Grits did win the election, but they didn't achieve a majority?
Well, Carney has a challenge. I mean, a minority party cannot pass legislation or budgets without the support from the opposition parties. You know, for example, Bloc Québécois is expected to have 23 seats, or the New Democratic Party will have between 7 and 10 seats, and that's down from the low 20s. And you can probably count out the Conservatives that hold about 144 to 145 seats. Now, you know, while Carney, may have had this miraculous comeback running on an anti-Trump platform, it's going to have to come up with some more universally appealing solutions, I think, to Canada's problems. And they're going to have to be more than I don't like Donald Trump and his tariffs. The fact is that, the issues Canadians care about are like the ones we care about, crime and housing. And that took a back seat to his peak with Trump during his campaign. If Carney cannot garner solid support from a fractured government, worst case, he would see a no confidence vote, which would prompt another election in 1 or 2 years. So his challenge will be constantly facing the hard negotiations with opposition parties. Consequently, his government will risk the persistent perception, I believe, of instability and unable to find solutions to get, the opposition parties' agreement on to solve Canada's domestic problems. He faces a perpetual parliamentary gridlock. If you look back at history, Canadian minority governments have had short lives, and Carney's going to have to come up with some solid alliances, or his government will be just another statistic.
Well, that's the difference between parliamentary government and pure democracy or constitutional republic like the United States, is that you have to form coalitions. Donald Trump doesn't have to do anything with the Democrats if he doesn't want to. If he wins the popular vote, or he wins the electoral vote, I should say, then he's got the office, period. And then he has to deal with a Congress that may or may not be in his favor. Of course, right now it is. So, Graham, in the late stages of the Canadian election campaign, we saw an image of a retired Liberal supporter in Ontario going viral. The picture showed the individual attending a Carney rally and flipping the double bird, or shall we say the double salute, double middle finger salute. So what's up with that guy? Where does he go?
Well, I guess, Tim, if he's got any sense by now, he's already planning to move to a little place in Canada called Alert, which I'm sure Andrew's heard of it. It's actually, as far as I know, the northernmost inhabited place on the planet. It's up there in the province of Nunavut, if I'm pronouncing that.
It's not a province, Graham. It's a territory.
Oh, it's a territory. Okay. All right, then. Well, anyway, that's where it is, Alert. So he should be on his way there by now, because probably for about half of the population of Canada, he's now pretty much public enemy number one. I think the perfect caption for that photograph would have been, "Let them eat cake," because that was exactly the attitude of that gentleman, I guess. And it seems to be kind of a good metaphor for the attitude of the entire establishment in the US, in Canada, in Europe, or at least the western part of Europe. This attitude that we're going to maintain the status quo. We've got what we want, kind of a family-friendly show, so I won't use the word, but basically F the rest of you, because we don't care. We're going to do things our way. Can't afford housing, struggling to pay your bills or feed your children. We don't care. If you're complaining about that, that makes you an inconvenience at best and an enemy of the state at worst. And you need to keep quiet and do what we tell you. And that one photograph of that gentleman really summed up that whole attitude. And particularly in Canada, the younger generations are upset because of the generation this guy falls into, which is obviously is a baby boomer. And the younger people are thinking, you see, these people are already established. They've got their lives worked out. They've got their houses. They've got everything, running smoothly. And they don't care about our future, in which we are going to be struggling. So I think, personally, I believe that gentleman and his photograph are not going to be soon forgotten and may figure into Canadian politics for possibly at least a couple of years to come or longer. I think that's an image for the ages, really, and not in a good way.
So, Graham, I assume when you said F the rest of you, you meant friend the rest of you, right? The social media turned to friend the rest of you. I'll just assume that as we carry on here. Yeah. All right, Mr. John Clark, let me ask you this. How much did Trump derangement syndrome play into this election when it came right down to it?
Well, I think Mr. Moran did a great article on this at Liberty Nation. Canadians give the Liberals another government, in which he looked at the polling data, which suggested that the baby boomers were very much influenced by the anti-Trump rhetoric and the double finger. But for younger Canadians, for Gen Zs, they're more concerned about inflation and the economy, as many of our panel have discussed today. And that's what is intriguing to me about Canada and about its parallels to the United States, which is that, giving people the finger is not really a policy proposal, but it's not going to fix the problems. We see demographic shifts going on in the young in both countries. I don't think this is going to be Trudeau's government because he will need the Quebec bloc or Bloc Québécois or others. And actually, anecdotally, when we were shearing sheep this week, our shearer had just come back from Canada, and she's a Liberal. And she asked me, she said, "What do you think about Canada becoming the 51st state?" She said, "I was very surprised how many people in Quebec were positive about the idea." And she's no conservative, and she was very inquisitive about this. And so I'm not sure I agree that long term, that may have been a backfire for them.
Francois Blanchet, he's the leader of the Bloc Québécois, and he had a news conference days before the election day, and he mirrored what Donald Trump was saying. How Donald Trump once said that it's just an artificial line between Canada and the United States that was established many years ago. And Blanchet said the other day that, Canada is just an artificial country. There's nothing real about it. Of course, that pandering to the whole separatist movement of the Bloc Québécois. So that's going to be a stark contrast between the Bloc and the ruling Liberals over the coming years, because that's the opinion of a lot of Quebec voters. To piggyback to what you're saying, John.
So 3 leaders, 3 elections, 3 losses. That's the Tories' record over the last decade. But the difference this time, however, is that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives fumbled the ball, or in Canada, you might say the puck, after ordering new drapes for 11 Sussex Drive, the Canadian equivalent of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Thank you, panel. President Donald Trump celebrated the first 100 days of his second administration with a rally in Macomb County, Michigan. Of course, a classic swing state. From tariffs to deportations to kneecapping universities condoning violence against Jews, it has been what we might call an e-ticket to ride for those over 4 feet tall.
As you know, this week marks the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. And President Trump's first 100 days have undoubtedly been the most monumental and historic of any administration in American history. President Trump has already delivered on hundreds of promises he made to the American people, and we will continue to talk about all of them throughout this week.
Graham, before we start with the accolades for the first 100 days of President Trump, let's talk about the other direction, about some of the maybe confusing actions and consequences of Donald Trump's first 100 days.
It's difficult to say because it is, 100 days. It's not like we're a year or a year and a half, 2 years into this presidency, and some things take a long time. And, any administration is kind of like, a super tanker at sea. Once that administration is gone and the next administration takes over, it takes a while to turn around that massive vessel, and go in an opposite direction, especially what Trump is doing. He's going in the absolute opposite direction in every way to what the Biden administration was doing. So, perhaps it's easy to be impatient about things, but I think there's kind of been a few gray areas, if you like, if you don't want to use the term black marks, but certainly gray areas. I think obviously the tariffs is the number one thing that's been causing heartburn, and perhaps that's a lot due to the negative press that the tariffs have been getting, which is kind of making people jumpy about the future of the economy. But nevertheless, I know Trump tries to use these tariffs as a kind of a weapon and kind of leverage, but at the same time, threatening to impose tariffs and then suddenly saying, well, we're delaying the implementation of this set of tariffs for a little while longer. It does kind of cause somewhat confusing atmosphere, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing for the country in general. Other than that, I think the signal gate thing at the Department of Defense was definitely an unforced error. And luckily the consequences of it in terms of real world results were not bad, but that could have been an issue. I mean, I really think that somebody should. I don't know if anyone's been held accountable for that, but somebody should be, because someone really messed up somewhere along the line with that whole thing. Really, obviously, if you were speaking to someone from the other side of the political spectrum, they would be coming out with a list. They'd need a lot more than 2 minutes to go through all of the things that have gone wrong, but or in their minds have gone wrong. But I think generally there's the confusion about whether or not agencies are going as well. For instance, the Department of Education. Well, is it going or is it not? Because it still seems to be here, whether it's been scaled back or not. So I think in general, Trump has been maybe possibly not completely following through yet on all of his promises. He's kind of partially lived up to some promises, but not all the way yet. And I think some people, even Trump supporters, they're probably happy, but at the same time, over one or two things, they're probably still scratching their head and saying, well, are we going to do this or are we not going to do it?
It almost seems sometimes like Donald Trump is conducting a negotiation in a meeting room. No, conducting the art of the deal by giving and taking and keeping people off balance. But he's not in a meeting room. He's doing it in public. And I think it's a lot harder for people to understand the hardball tactics that he does use to try and, get a good final deal.
Yeah. Well, and I just jump in real quick, Tim, and say this, that in a way, yeah, from what you said is what Trump is kind of doing. It's almost like he's doing politics in public and in real time. And the American public are not used to that, because usually that's not the way, presidents operate.
Also, there's been a level of transparency we've never seen before, in the sense that you really see Trump on average twice a day making announcements and taking questions, which is a big contrast from the Joe Biden administration. And speaking of that, Mr. Clark, John Clark, in the Biden administration, the cabinet was largely invisible. It was all about Biden and his inner circle. But now Trump has a very activist cabinet that is very present in the media day after day. So what do you make after 100 days of Trump's cabinet selection?
Well, I do think that's been perhaps one of his weak spots, as Graham correctly points out. The appearance of being equivocal on things like tariffs has certainly created a feeding frenzy in the press, but so has Signalgate. And amongst his cabinet members, the weak point, and as Graham hints, maybe if a head needs to roll, Pete Hegseth's head will be rolling. That could be in the works. The odds, if you look at the betting markets, have increased that he will be dismissed. Now, no Secretary of Defense has been this unpopular since the notorious Donald Rumsfeld, where a lot of people look to is CNN's Harry Enton, the pollster. And he pointed out that Donald Trump is down minus 5 points right now, but that Pete Hegseth is down 14, and that he is really a drag on this president and really is a headache. And so I think there is concern. And I think, by the way, it's part of the whole feeding frenzy of the mainstream media that they abhor anything this president does. They're looking for failure. They want the price of eggs to go up. They want war in Russia. They want conflict. They wanted to fail so badly that they seem to be praying for their own hardship. And that infests the way they look at Pam Bondi, the way they look at Brooke Rollins, the way they look, all of his cabinet picks are all under heightened scrutiny by a very critical press, which was, I think, more conciliatory in the Biden era. So Hegseth has to keep his game up that much the more, and the Signal app may mean that the crowds are calling for a sacrifice.
In baseball, they say that if you hire a rookie manager who's never managed at the major league level before, the thing you need to do is hire a bench coach, a lieutenant who's a grizzled veteran who can sort of impart wisdom on the rookie at the top of the scale. And perhaps that's really what Hegseth needs and has not yet been able to find. So, Andrew, let's talk about 100 days of the economy. How is the United States of America doing?
Well, the U.S. labor market is holding steady despite all the negative prognostications that Doge is going to lead to all these massive layoffs and tariffs lead to massive layoffs. Before this recording, the first quarter GDP came out, and it showed the first contraction in the U.S. economy since the first quarter of 2022. But other numbers are flashing red. You look at ADP's private payrolls report; it showed that just 62,000 jobs were created. So in economics, you have a lagging effect. So with the administration's policy changes, it could take time. I think Graham alluded to this. It could take time to appear in the broader and hard economic data. But I'm going to say one thing, though, about tariffs. And of course, I know a lot of Trump supporters, they love tariffs, but it has backfired tremendously on the administration. I'm going to say one name here, Scott Bessent. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he has been the rock in this administration. He has kept things together. In February, he said that no longer will Donald Trump and the White House care what Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says anymore. He doesn't care what they do because they're going to focus on the 10-year yield. Okay, so that's what they're doing. They employ all these policies hoping to bring down the 10-year yield. Then April 2nd comes along, Liberation Day. The Treasury yields tank. They fall to about 3.8%. Then in the coming days, a complete reversal. It goes as high as 4.6%, completely backfiring. And then Kevin Hassett, he's one of the top economic advisors. He was on, I think it was CNBC, and he said that the spike in Treasury yields forced the administration to take an early pivot on the reciprocal tariffs. That shows right there is that they did not anticipate the backfire that would occur from the reciprocal tariffs or the universal baseline tariffs. And now you're constantly having every day confusion. You don't know what you're talking about. There was a press call recently about Trump providing exemptions or relief to the auto tariffs. And that call, nobody had any clue what they were talking about. Everyone was all over the place with the steel aluminum tariffs, auto tariffs, reimbursements. Reporters had no clue what was going on. So the administration, I think, is going day by day and just tergiversating on all these different policies. And the interest rate movements, and now Trump doubling down now and ratcheting up his pressure campaign on the Fed, I think is an indictment of that suspicion.
Well, as Donald Trump said, the effect of his tariff regime is going to be long-term, not short-term, and we've certainly seen evidence of that so far. So, Dave, let's turn to you. No peace between Ukraine and Russia, and that's taking its toll, too, because Trump promised to have that war ended on day one. I think people knew he was exaggerating, but whatever. The optics are becoming increasingly troublesome for the administration, are they not?
Yes, they are, except that, you had the 15 minutes of focused conversation in the Vatican at Pope Francis' funeral, which was more important as the photo op than anything substantive, really. But real progress has proven elusive, unfortunately, and frustration with Putin is growing day to day, and especially when there isn't some solid evidence that a ceasefire is imminent or even possible. The sticking points have not changed. What to do with illegally annexed Crimea and territory Russian troops occupy and Ukrainian forces are not dislodging. The Donetsk, Luhansk, the Zaporizhia and Kherson, all held by Russia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff have been in talks with Russians. This last week, Witkoff traveled to Moscow on April 24th for discussions on the 25th, and he was talking with Putin directly. And following the meeting, between Witkoff and Putin, Kremlin aide Yuri Yushakov characterized the discussion as constructive and very useful. Now, Putin says he wants a 72-hour ceasefire, May 8th through the 10th, to commemorate the end of World War II. Now, honestly, Ukraine doesn't believe the ceasefire pledge, and they cite the 3,000 violations during the Easter 2025 truce. Most of those watching the situation believe Putin's offers of a ceasefire are just posturing to give the impression that he seeks peace when his troops are actually maintaining military pressure. Still, I think, Trump has expressed strong displeasure with Putin and is clearly not reluctant to place secondary sanctions on Russia if there's no progress. So no breakthrough is imminent, a lot of frustration.
Well, one thing is certain about Donald Trump's first 100 days is that the next 100 days are also certain to be a barn burner. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, panel. The Democratic Party appears to be in a serious stage 4 death rattle after the 2024 election losses. While the GOP is riding high and the field base is loaded in a technical cleanup batter at bat, all the while octogenarian Democrats squabble with the kids in the dugout. After sitting out last season in defense mode, the younger progressives are full throttle taking over the party. Have the young ones gone a bit hog wild? Yes, that David Hogg, daring to publicly rebuke Speaker Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer. Let's turn to you, Dave. Most of us remember or have studied the woes of George McGovern in 1972 when he lost a landslide election, 49 states, at the hands of Richard Nixon. McGovern once said, "I opened up the doors of the Democratic Party and 20 million people walked out." Is that what's happening to the Democratic Party right now?
The truth is, I think that McGovern was ahead of his time. He may have opened the doors, but the moderate Democrats walked out in 2024. What you have today is really a deeply divided party with no middle ground. The split is between the rabid progressive ideologues like Bernie Sanders and child actor Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, compared with moderates like Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who is a big government guy, but he sees change as incremental. The progressives have a showstopper of a problem. On the 80%, 20% issues where 80% of the voters don't want men in women's sports, want school choice for their kids, don't want illegal aliens roaming around killing their neighbors, and do not want to be told what stove to buy, well, the Democrats, and then progressives particularly, they have, through intellectual prowess and stamina, managed to capture the hearts and minds of the other 20% of the voter constituency. Republicans, on the other hand, by accident or purpose, have embraced the 80% winning issues. Oddly enough, new Republicans are the working class Americans, immigrants who have come into the U.S. through legal ways. Black Americans who used to be solidly in the Democrats' camp now realize the Democrats have kept them down with programs deemed to them as culturally insensitive and really strike at their integrity.
So, John, if the progressives get a toehold now, and they're the only ones we seem to be seeing in the media, they're the ones that are making all the noise, where does this leave voters in the middle and those looking for a home who aren't necessarily comfortable with Donald Trump and or the Republican Party?
Well, I think Dave has hit a lot on it. That toehold is a gift for conservatives in the GOP because that toehold by the extremists. You didn't mention Mr. Tim Walz, I don't think, Dave.
There was a reason.
I don't think you were going to list him as a moderate. And
No.
So some of but you're exactly right. They're on the wrong side of history, as one might say, when it comes to men in transgender sports. I'm not sure you emphasized the popularity of defending gang members, rapists, and drug dealers, which seems to be the fashion right now amongst that child actress, I think you called her. And meanwhile, we see a similar demographic as we discussed in Canada, where the blue-haired old not blue dog Democrats anymore. The people who are not suffering the brunt of the economic problems that the youth are out there ranting and raving for war with Russia and open borders, and the disconnect is phenomenal. And meanwhile, a lot of those younger people are not moving into the far left progressivism. We might even see a time where not wearing a nose ring is a radical act. We see Catholics, people, young men leading the move into Catholicism in the UK and in the US. Lisa Donner wrote a great piece about this. I think as Jesus is making a comeback, especially among young people. I thought that was a great piece. People are sick of the hate. They're sick of the double finger thing, whether it's in Canada or the United States. A lot of young people have woken up to the lies of wokeness. A lot of these children have grown up in the shadow of this hatefulness, this divisiveness. As Dave points out, Blacks and Hispanics have caught on to the scam, and they don't want to be scammed anymore. They want real policies that matter for the bulk of the people. And AOC and Bernie Sanders are just going on with their same Marxist, revolutionary, hate everything rants, and they're not showing an ability to pivot. Gavin Newsom at least finally acknowledged that maybe men and women's sports wasn't good, and he got attacked for it by the far left. So the more the far left leads, the more this party, I think, will find itself suffering a repeat of the 2024 event where they said, well, we'll just call him a racist and call him a Nazi. And they were totally out of touch. People are sick of it, and they're looking for unity. In fact, we saw that a black football player who dared go golfing with the president was excoriated by white people because he shouldn't be allowed to do that. He should know better. We're not supposed to talk to people even if we don't agree with them. I think Dave is right that that's going to continue to push people in the walk away direction.
Now, Graham, when you and I were growing up, the Democrats were the party of peace and of the working class. Now it seems they're the party of war and rich coastal elites and radicals. How did this happen?
Well, I think it all comes down to the stranglehold that the left has had on the world of academia for some time, and of course, the eventual outcomes there is that you've got a lot of people who came out of the universities and the schools years ago now, and they were already indoctrinated with this radical left-wing ideology. And of course, now they are the people who are running corporations, or at least they're senior executives in these corporations. And they are, they're in the world of media, they're in the world of entertainment. And so they have been able to, even though the radical left does not represent a majority of Democrat voters. It doesn't seem that way, though, because they seem to be wielding an outsized amount of influence, and they are the loudest voices. And so we think now that the entire left has gone completely lunatic extremist. That's not true, but the faction that has, they're the ones that are calling all the shots. And of course, what's funny is that you still got a lot of Democrats. I have Democrats who I know personally who still complain about, the Republicans only care about the wealthy, the Republicans only care about the rich, and their jaws drop when I point out to them, but most of the wealthy, most of the rich in this country now actually vote Democrat and donate to the Democratic Party. You've got big tech on your side. You've got big pharma on your side. You've got the entertainment industry. You've got the world of publishing and media on your side. There are more billionaires who donate to Democrats than there are who donate to Republicans, and their jaws drop. I think there's a lot of Democrats out there who haven't even really seen this radical shift. Some of them still believe that they're supporting the, Bill Clinton's Democratic Party. And they don't even understand that they are now, you talk about, complaining about the 1%. Well, the 1% mostly give their money to Democrats these days. So, and they don't seem to understand that, which is kind of funny. It's a mass delusion almost.
Well, if the wealthy and the college educated hadn't voted in the numbers that they did in the last election, Kamala Harris might have lost 40 states or 45. That's how much the Democrats had to depend on the so-called elitist vote. So, Andrew, what do you see as a possible go-between uh, from the Democratic Party to average, everyday, ordinary Americans who have to be looking at what the Democrats are doing now and saying, well, maybe I don't like Trump much. Maybe I even dislike Trump or even hate him. But these people aren't giving me any sort of constructive alternative.
Okay, I'm going to answer that question, but first I have two questions here. One, what actually this ties into what you're saying, Tim. What makes you think that the Republicans will hold on to power, Dave, considering that it's the economy, stupid, and if consumer sentiment remains as low as it is currently is over the next, let's say, heading into the midterms, why would voters still vote Republican? And two, when were Democrats ever a party of peace? All I know from history is that they were at the forefront of a lot of the wars the United States has been involved in. Korea, Vietnam, during Clinton bombing Iraq, and
it's true, but they were also at the heart of the anti-war movement in the 1960s, which sort of defined the radicalism of that era.
What about LBJ? LBJ was a Democrat president, correct?
And they drove him out of office.
Okay, great. So now, just to present a proposal for a lot of Democrat voters, maybe take Canada's approach and establish a new Democratic Party. And don't have Jagmeet Singh lead it, but of course you can have another viable option for the sane Democrat voters who don't like men playing in women's sports or men going to women's bathrooms or everything is 2S LGBTQIAPP plus. So that's a proposal the Democrats could consider. Of course, you split the vote, so that'll be an issue. But that's the only thing I can think of that would save modern Democrats and blue dog Democrats and blue dog Reaganites, all those people. So that's the only thing I can think of. I mean, if anyone else can think of something, then I'm more than full on ears. Because no way is the Democrat Party going to suddenly say, yeah, you know what, we agree with Republicans that men should not be in women's washrooms.
Well, I'll tell you what. One thing we do know for sure is that the Democratic Party is losing its image as the party of the common man. And how they're going to take back that mantle from the Donald Trump Republicans definitely remains to be seen. Thank you, panel. We are back to twist the brain and have a little fun with our panel of overly excitable people, except for Dave, who cheats, and Graham, who, despite his young age, can certainly be considered a curmudgeon. Okay, so Andrew is running the board this time, so things will get definitely weird and possibly incomprehensible. Andrew, take it over.
I'm sorry. I have a terrible cough. That's just lingering, but nobody cares about that. Anyway, I am back, baby. Unfortunately, Dave has been filling in for me for the last couple of shows, so everyone give a round of applause for Dave for doing a wonderful job.
So I'll do some polite golf applause.
Or the Nancy Pelosi applause. That one.
Dave made it easier because Dave's answers kind of narrowed it down for us because of the satire that your test is harder. Sorry.
All right, so before we get down to the nitty-gritty, this is for the audience. If you prefer Dave Patterson as your host of Just for Fun, please comment. If you prefer me, Andrew Moran, as your host of Just for Fun, hit that like button. So now on to the
Oh, here we go.
We have
Eternal strife.
Excuse me. We have a list of trivia questions about news of the day. But since Tim Donner is gracing us with his presence as the host of the show, I have to toss in some baseball questions into the mix related to the 2025 baseball season. So,
Excellent. Good choice.
but they're really analytics questions. So let's see. Anyway, so
Graham will think it's unfair because he believes baseball is about as exciting as a beer growing competition.
Possibly more exciting than cricket. So there's that.
Well, Andrew, we're going to have to work on educating or re-educating these people.
we've said that for years and nothing's ever transpired from that. So anyway, now on to the questions here. Now, question number 1. What form of identification will you soon need to board domestic flights? Is it a library card, a real ID, or a frequent flyer card?
BYD.
Tim got that. Yeah. Nice. Tim's on the board with 1. Question number 2. For what service is former President Joe Biden reportedly charging $300,000 for? Is it speaking, autographs, or posing?
Hey, autograph. Hey,
Autograph.
speaking.
That's it.
How come it says posing? I think I would love to see former President Biden posing. But anyway, the answer is speaking. And I do believe Graham got that one.
Well, it can't be a signature because, all he can use is the auto pad.
Yes.
And I don't think people would pay $300,000 for that.
All right.
It costs a lot of money to transport that thing across the country, so maybe that's why they would charge that much for it.
Yes.
No,
On your lock and key.
question number 3. What team is currently leading Major League Baseball with a runner in scoring positions and 2 outs? Is it the Boston Red Sox, the New York Mets, or the Cincinnati Reds?
Any Boston Red Sox.
Actually, no, that is incorrect.
Hey, Cincinnati Reds.
Yes, Joe Schaefer, you will happy to hear this. It is the Cincinnati Reds leading the league with runner in scoring position and 2 outs. Congratulations.
You see, I guess use some logic there. I figured it was your team.
Exactly.
They're
See,
terrible with runners in scoring position. Haven't you seen them? There was another night. It was a runner on second and third, no out. What do? They fumbled and they didn't get anything. Oh, they're terrible in these situations. They're really good when there's no runners on base. They're excellent. They're on the top in the league. Their offense is incredible, but they crumble under pressure when it's runner on second, runner on third. Anyway, question number 4. Who will former Vice President Kamala Harris have a one-on-one conversation with at next month's fundraiser for the Democratic National Committee? Is it DNC Chair Ken Martin, Senator Bernie Sanders, or John Clark?
Ken Martin.
German.
Ken Martin. A.
The answer is yes, DNC Chair Ken Martin. Dave is finally on the board. So, question number 5. On April 22nd, the Supreme Court considered whether Maryland parents' rights were violated when they couldn't opt their children out of lessons on what topics? Is it gay and transgendered, DEI, or critical race theory?
Gay and transgender.
Yeah. You know what, freak man, our kids, they read one of those stories in first grade class in their day about this kid who has her own, who doesn't want to be identified as a sister, and she has her own pronouns. Anyway, the answer is gay and transgender, and Tim got that one, so Tim is leading 2-1. All right. Speaking of leading 2-1, what team's third baseman has the highest wins above average, or WAR, compared to the rest of the league? Is it the Boston Red Sox Alex Bregman, the San Francisco Giants Matt Chapman, or the New York Mets Mark Vientos?
I'm going to go with Matt Chapman.
No, it is the Boston Red Sox Alex Bregman, who has a 1.4 WAR.
I assume what he did there, people, what he did was he threw us a curveball in the first one to make it seem like he wasn't going to give Red Sox.
Yeah, I know.
Extended questions, and
I did.
And that's very clever. Very clever.
Because I would have chosen the Cubs.
Well, my favorite pitch is the knuckleball, so you gotta see the knuckleball instead of the curveball. When I was a kid, I could throw a very good curveball, but now I'm old. It doesn't happen anymore. Anyway, so next question. Name the Democratic senator who announced on April 23rd that he would not seek re-election after serving for nearly 3 decades in the upper chamber. My goodness. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, or Senator Mark Warner of Virginia?
Hey, Dick
Durbin. That's a tie.
We do that one, right, Graham? We do that one. They're just quicker off the base.
But yeah, unfortunately, Davis was actually tied now, 2 apiece, and Graham has 1. All right, next question.
I'm the loser.
Klaus Schwab abruptly withdrew from his role as the head of which organization? The World Economic Forum, the World of Eating the Bugs, or the Close Society Foundations?
Hey, World Economic Forum.
Yes, Dave has that. Yes, Dave is in the lead. 3-2. Yes. Now, next question. What pitcher is leading the league in walks allowed? Is it the New York
Red Sox. Oh, sorry.
Mets.
Is it the New York Yankees' Carlos Rodon, the Boston Red Sox' Garrett Crochet, or the Baltimore Orioles' Charlie Morton?
I'll say Charlie Morton.
Yes, yeah, Tim, you got that one. Yeah, it is Charlie Morton. He's having quite an interesting season after being, quite a dependable pitcher for so long.
Well, he's washed up.
Yeah, probably. Well, the Baltimore Orioles, I mean, they're in the basement of the American
Hard to
League East.
believe.
That's been surprising. Yeah, because they're such a nice young core of talent. Anyway, nobody cares about the Baltimore Orioles except maybe Graham. So, next question. On Thursday, DC District Judge Colleen Collar-Cotelli ruled that states don't have to make voters do what to register? Is it show ID, wait and
show
vote,
ID.
or pledge allegiance?
Breathe.
Yes, Dave is correct. Show ID. It is now
Okay,
tied.
the next
3-3.
sports
Graham
question,
still is
Rory McIlroy.
Red
Question.
Sox.
Mets.
That's the last. No, John, that's the answer to the last question. Anyway, next question. Name the technology some police departments are using to find criminals online. Is it Craigslist personals, AI personas, or targeted ads?
AI personas.
Yeah, actually, John got that. I believe. Yes, AI personas. Okay.
I would give it to him. I think Graham is being awfully sort of somnambulistic here during this lively little
Yeah, I think he's asleep.
tete-a-tete.
I think the biggest surprise of this question is that Craigslist is still around. When I was in high school or middle school, that website was very popular. I don't know if everyone used it.
Back in the days of AOL.
Yes.
I use it to sell cows and sheep and hay.
Who is the deported illegal alien some Democrats have gone to visit in El Salvador in an effort to return him to the U.S.? Is it the Maryland Man, or the Maryland Man?
The Maryland Man.
I say,
Baltimore Orioles.
Rigo Garcia.
I say
He's the
D.
Maryland Man.
I get to win because I say D. All of the above.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, put him on the board. Yeah, look at that. 4-3. Anyway, so last question here. This is a doozy. Who will win the 2025 World Series? Is it the Boston Red Sox, the New York Mets, or the Toronto Blue Jays?
And Boston Red
Your
Sox.
Mets.
livelihood depends on the answer to this question. How
Boston Red Sox.
Mets.
about you, John? Who do you think's going to win?
I couldn't care less.
That's not an answer, John.
The Baltimore Orioles, at least they're a bird.
And then how about you, Graham? Who do you think will win the World Series of those three teams?
Well, I'm going to go with, and not because Tim said this, but through a process of elimination, who's not going to win it, I'm going to go with the Mets.
Ooh,
So
good
since no
choice. Good choice. Great wisdom,
I
Grant.
guess everyone is fired because no one picks the New York Mets. So anyway, everyone, that is it for Just for Fun. Remember, if you prefer Dashing Beef Patterson, please comment that you prefer or hit the like if you like Andrew Moran as the Just for Fun host. Now return to Tim Donner.
Hope we left you rolling in the aisles. Thanks for tuning in. So that's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Now, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Tim Donner, filling in for Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.